Hello everyone, and welcome to the Midwifery Week question and answer session. And you're here with some of us from the maternity unit at the Norfolk and Norwich. And we're just going to introduce ourselves before then going into answering some of the questions that you've been sending in. I'm Kelda and I'm a specialist midwife at the Norfolk and Norwich.
I'm Gemma, I'm a specialist midwife at the Norfolk and Norwich.
I'm Nina and I'm a diabetes specialist midwife at the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital.
And I'm Luke and I'm a Midwifery Care Assistant working on the birthing unit at the Norfolk and Norwich.
I think every day that I'm almost reminded that this career was right for me because I love the job that I do. I'm a specialist midwife now and I've worked in midwifery for just over 13 years. And every day I love and look forward to my job, and it embraces who I am and my personality, and I just feel that I am maternity through and through. There are some days where it's incredibly stressful and busy and challenging, very, very emotional, and you have sleepless nights, but ultimately I've never regretted this choice of a midwifery career. There's so much diversity in the role and change is constant, but the fundamentals of midwifery run through me as they did in my nursing, because I was a nurse first. And because every day is so challenging and diverse, we were able to go off into different specialities, and I believe that midwifery runs through the heart of me. And because I enjoy every day and because I'm proud to be a midwife, I have known ever since I started midwifery that this was what I was going to be forever.
So I think that a lot of people think that midwifery is just catching babies, but actually lots of midwives in different specialities can go months or years without delivering a baby. My job as a diabetes specialist midwife is to kind of walk through the pregnancy side by side with the patient. So it can go from the day after they've had a positive pregnancy test, going through the first scan, all the appointments, speaking to them regularly on the phone, by email. Sometimes I'm there for the birth, but not always. I'd love to be, but not as often as I get to be. But then it's first in line for a cuddle when the baby's born, and then a couple of years later I start all over again with the same patient, and it's literally the best thing ever. I'm also involved in things that people don't always realise are part of a pregnancy, so that might be any social concerns, it might be helping with housing, mental health, just helping them kind of get life prepared for when the baby arrives, and we support them all the way through that. So it's not just the traditional sense of just catching the baby at the end of it, although that is the lovely part of being a midwife.
There's hundreds of different qualities that everyone in the department brings that are all kind of unique to them. But kind of I've managed to narrow it down to think like three things I think we all have. Kind of the top thing I think is empathy, sort of being able to, I mean, not just sympathise, like really put yourself in someone's shoes, kind of at whatever point in their pregnancy or postnatally, you know, if they're having a difficult time, you want to be able to be fully invested in that person and help them in whatever way they need to be helped. Next thing I've got is a belief that women are completely autonomous and have full control over their own bodies. So you see a lot of times women saying, oh, I had to do this, so I had to do that. But it's more about facilitating their journey and supporting them to do what they want to do. Kind of, if there's risks, then they can be counselled for it. But just really believing that they're in charge of the whole thing. And the last thing I've got is just an ability to be cool and clear-headed. So sometimes it does go a little bit topsy-turvy. And kind of we've all got the knowledge to be able to handle that, but being able to stay on top of it and just do what you need to do is, I think, essential, really.
So my favourite area to work in, well, I think I would probably have to say community. In community, as a midwife, you get the opportunity to spend a lot of time with women through their whole pregnancy and into the postnatal period. And so the relationship that you build up with them is over a long period of time. And during that time, you get to know a lot about them, you still have real insight into their lives, and there are loads of opportunities to really support them, to give them a positive experience over a really life-changing point in time for them. So it is immensely satisfying to be involved in their lives at that time, and I think that that experience of being through their whole journey with them is really special. And the relationship that you have with them within that is very special. And you meet some amazing people who inspire you, families that inspire you. And that relationship is really the joy of midwifery for me. Having said that, you do, as a midwife in other areas, also build up great relationships with women, which is really brilliant part of the job. And often if you are working on labour ward or postnatal ward, you might have a relationship for a short period of time, so it can be quite intense, but still can be really enriching, the experience that you have getting to know people and supporting them. Having said that about community, my job since I've qualified until a couple of years ago was actually as a rotational midwife. So that meant that I worked across all areas of maternity, including community, spending a few years in each area before rotating to another area. And for me, that is a really brilliant experience, being on a rotational contract and getting to work in new areas with new challenges on a regular basis. It's a really great way of keeping all of your skills up to date and having a broad understanding of all different aspects of care. So I personally am someone that really enjoys new challenges and change. So actually rotating really suits me, and I've really enjoyed that aspect of the job. And as a newly qualified midwife, you tend to be employed on a rotational contract. So from the word go, you'll be out there moving into different areas, which can be quite daunting when you're first doing it. In fact, it's daunting even after some time going to a new place. These things always are, but you soon settle back in, and I think that's a really satisfying part of the job.
I've spent a lot of time now thinking about this since I knew this question was coming, and I've actually realised I can't remember the very first delivery that I saw. It hasn't truly stuck with me, but I think it's because our training is quite intense, and over the 18 months course that I did, because I'd been a nurse first, I delivered 40 babies in that 18 months. We'd already witnessed quite a few before that, before you were allowed to get your hands on and deliver your first baby. And since then I've delivered hundreds more. And I remember one night I actually delivered 3 babies in one shift, and even at the end of that shift I was hard pushed to remember each of the experiences, because you kind of live the moment whilst you're in it. But sort of reflecting back and thinking about my last 13-14 years in midwifery and then my training on top, is that there's many beautiful moments that have stayed with me and they've kind of all merged over time. And it's not specific deliveries that I remember, because being a midwife is much more than just catching that baby. You remember the amazing characters that you've met and you've helped along the way, and the families and their stories and the characters that you've come into contact with, don't you? And I remember the situations that I've been in, and I'll still drive past. I was 10 years in community, nearly 10 years in community, and I can drive through a random little Norfolk village, and all of a sudden I'll see a house and I remember delivering a baby there, or driving past a surgery that I forgot was in a certain place and remember that I've helped and worked with women there. But instead of like that first initial delivery, the things that really spring to mind when I was thinking of specific people and specific deliveries were the times when I've delivered my first set of twins. And I remember the mum tried for a vaginal delivery. The second baby was a bit more complicated. We had to go to section. And the dad was already holding the first twin, and because the mum was having a section, I then placed the second twin in this big, strong military man's arms, and he was telling me all the way through the section how incredibly strong he was and what a man he was, and I placed this second twin into his arm, and he just cried, and it was sheer love and being overwhelmed. And I just cried as well, and it was so moving. And so there's times like that that really stay with you. I remember the time I delivered a baby in the lift. I think I'd been qualified about 5 years, and I was on the 3rd floor using my bottom to stop the lift doors closing so it didn't then go up and down. And I delivered a mum in the lift, yeah, and then helped that baby, still attached to its cord and the placenta inside the mum, get onto delivery floor. I remember my first eclamptic fit in the community during one of my antenatal classes, and had no medical background knowledge of her, and we had to air ambulance her back to the hospital. That was quite a moment that stayed with me. I also remember the first mum whose baby I delivered who was born not breathing at 20 weeks, which was incredibly sad. And I remember holding that mum and crying with her and the dad, and yeah, the tears and the joy that you feel for people when it's going good, and the sadness that you feel, and the love and empathy you have for the people when it doesn't go right. They're the moments that stay with you. I remember delivering a baby to a mum who had previously had 14 losses, miscarriages, early and slightly later. And the tears that I cried that day on handing her her first baby was pretty immense. And I also it's making me feel really emotional talking about it. I also remember the first crash section that I had to run to, because all of a sudden I couldn't hear a baby's heartbeat, and we got the scanner in and the heart was barely beating of the baby. And from that decision to having the baby out took us 7 minutes. That was impressive teamwork on delivery floor, and a very proud moment that we had that baby out and that baby's life was saved. And other moments that I remember, the first time I had to resus a baby and saved a life, the enormous sense of pride that you have, and you can go home thinking, wow, what a difference you've made today. Those moments are standout moments, and moments that still deeply touch me and are very emotional. And you know, like delivering a lady's 9th baby, and her I remember her saying to me that it was her 9th baby, and she said, crikey, I'd forgotten what a contraction felt like. And I thought, really, after 9? How do you forget that? But she had. And we went on to deliver that little baby, who came out arm first and actually tickled my hand as I did a vaginal assessment. So yeah, moments like that stay with you. I can't actually remember the first delivery that I did. So maybe that's a bit of an insight to some of the challenges that we face.
It would have been nicer to get started earlier, like rather than kind of faff about in my 20s and kind of make the wrong decisions about careers and stuff. But sort of looking back and thinking more in depth, I don't think me at 17 would have been mature enough or kind of grown up enough to take on the kind of responsibility that you need to work where we do. So no, actually, kind of, I'm pretty happy with how it all worked out and how I've got to where I am. But in terms of getting started, again, kind of my experience is different to most other people's. So a lot of MCAs that work with us, they worked on the general side first, then had to kind of jump through so many different hoops and book bank shifts and supernumerary shifts and get maternity experience, and then eventually apply and get a contract. Whereas I just kind of walked into it really without too much hassle. I just applied for the job and supposedly interviewed well. But like, my advice to someone wanting to get started is just kind of display a love and a passion for it. You know, kind of, if you can get some work experience, great. If you can't, then just sort of email the next higher up person and ask if you can come and join and watch and learn, and take it from there.
Probably started my training about 16 years ago, I think, and a lot has changed since then. So some of it has made the job a little bit harder, like lots of paperwork and things like that, but it needs to be done. But other things have really improved. So midwifery has come on so much. There's a lot more autonomy for midwives, particularly in my role. I do a lot of sort of insulin dose adjustments and things like that, that we wouldn't have done that like back when I started my training. But also, like, for women, there is just so much choice now. They have choice about the tests that they have, and they've always had choice, but we've really widened that choice. So now you can have tests that would have had to have been invasive tests, which are now not invasive tests, so just a simple blood test. They also can have scans done in community to check the baby's the right way up. We would have never dreamt of that back when I started my training. They have choice about where they have their baby. They could have a home birth, and we now have, I mean, we've always been able to have a home birth, but now we have a home from home on the midwifery-led birthing unit, which we never had the midwifery-led birthing unit when I started my training. And also the choice to have a cesarean. That's still relatively new in my mind, because that's only been for a few years, I think, that you could request to have a cesarean for no health reason, which just adds to women's choice and the options that are available for them. So I think that's really great. We've got lots more testing, so now we can test to see if we think that someone's waters have broken. That's still relatively new to me. Test if they've got a high chance of getting preeclampsia and things like that. So what we can do now has come along a really long way, and actually I forget sometimes quite how much we've come along, and that midwives can do so much. Sometimes you don't even need doctors.
So the biggest change from going from being a student midwife to a qualified midwife is that it's the first time that you practice completely independently, and that is really, really daunting at first. So exciting, massively exciting, being out there on your own. You know, you're sort of supported by the team around you, but you're in that room with that woman on your own, and you're planning her care and in charge of what happens during that period, and in charge of escalating anything if things start to go outside of kind of normal childbirth. So it's really exciting, all of that, but also pretty terrifying at first. So I think it's a big adjustment having that safety net of the mentor who you've been working with not being around anymore and taking that responsibility yourself. At the same time, though, I think that it feels really empowering, because whilst you feel like frightened in a lot of ways and apprehensive about it, it also actually, you gradually realise how far you've come. So all of that hard work you've put in during your training, you start to realise that actually you come out of a situation where you realise that you've managed it, and that's incredibly empowering, because you actually realise that all of that skill and knowledge that you've been building up is you're actually using it every day. And it's a bit of a roller coaster, because sometimes you feel like you've really got it, and then you go right back down again and feel like you don't know anything. So it's really up and down, but generally it's a really empowering experience, becoming a newly qualified midwife and working under your own registration. It's very exciting.
I was actually a nurse before I trained for my midwifery. It was my first calling. I loved it. I did really love it, and it's contributed to who I am today and the person that I am. So it gave me a really good basis for caring. But there is definitely a real difference between the two professions. So if you're considering either career, I think you already have to be that person that has empathy and be compassionate and have objectivity, and also to be able to solve problems and listen. You need all of those skills that you can't often be taught to become either a midwife or a nurse. So there's many things that we actually share, characteristics about the person yourself that you would share. However, there is definitely a difference in the professions that I have found personally. And so my opinion is that with nursing, you're focusing on the individual health needs of a person, and you act a lot. So you have to have a lot of knowledge on the illnesses and different conditions. It's very varied nursing. I mean, for example, in my training, I worked on a gastro unit and I worked in orthopedics. I'd worked on an ambulance and with A&E doing my acute care, worked in an old people's nursing home, and so had done end of life care. But basically, you're working with people that are having ill health or health complications, and you're there to provide the care and advise and counsel for the recovery of that, and or to aid that person to live more comfortably. You follow plans and instructions that are often formed and put together by doctors and other multi-care professionals. And you're kind of carrying out those instructions, but you still need that care and empathy and the love of a person. But once you've qualified, you can become more specialist in nursing. You'll find different areas that you love, and that's why it's the training is so diverse, and you work on so many different units or different wards or different settings, whether that's community or in trust. But once you've qualified, the nurse friends that I qualified with have done really varied experiences now and have become special nurses in their own rights in their different areas of practice. So that's very interesting with the nursing. But for me personally, midwifery was my true calling, because we are the key healthcare professionals that support and guide and care for the mother and the baby and the family through 9 months. So on a ward with a nurse, quite often you wouldn't see the person the next day unless they were there for long-term care. As a midwife, you really become involved in that person. You really buy into their lives and their family and their health and well-being, and you know, you're involved in the antenatal, quite often the birth and the short postnatal period, depending where you work. Some of us are based in the community and some just in antenatal care. Some are there to aid in delivery and being on delivery suite and the MLBU, and then people in the community will be there for the postnatal. So there's still varied roles that you can do within midwifery, and you can rotate. My position as I first qualified was a rotational position, so I've experienced all aspects of midwifery now over the last several years. And yeah, midwifery is vast, but you have to be a person that is responsive for caring and sustaining a positive relationship with your women. You have to enable and promote the best possible birth experience and outcome, and you're basically helping this family to have the best start in their new journey of parenthood. Yeah, roles are really diverse, and like Neela is a specialist in diabetes, and I'm now a specialist midwife that has trained to do sonography. So I do the ultrasound in the 3rd trimester, which is a position that I never thought would even be available when I first qualified. It's something, it's a completely different path to which I thought I was going to take. But I love all the roles that I've experienced in midwifery, but fundamentally it's about that woman, and every aspect of midwifery is about being calm and being a teacher, possibly a performer, a listener, a carer. And yeah, I think from the moment I started my midwifery, even my nursing actually, from when I started nursing to midwifery, because the nursing led to my midwifery, I knew that I would never do anything else personally. But the roles are similar, but very different. So you kind of have to look within yourself to think what is right for you.
Thinking about the highlights of my career, there have been too many amazing experiences that I have been through with women and with colleagues to mention. Probably one of the highlights I should say is probably being strong-armed into being at the birth of a good friend and witnessing my goddaughter come into the world. That was pretty special. But in more recent years, particularly in my current job as diabetes specialist midwife, I have been so lucky because I've been there a couple of years now, so I'm starting to see women that I looked after a few years ago come back now pregnant again, but with their toddlers or their babies from their previous pregnancies. And nothing beats that feeling of seeing someone again after a couple of years and seeing that baby that you nurtured from the minute they got pregnant until the baby was born is just there, healthy and happy, and the mum is happy, and seeing the person that they've grown into going from not having been a mum before to then being a mum and just changing in such a wonderful way. That's been really nice. Probably my most special moment has been in the last year or so when I looked after someone previously that had a really tough pregnancy, a really hard time, and it didn't end well. And this year being able to help her in the subsequent pregnancy, and that moment when I found out that she'd had a healthy baby after months and months of worry and stress and hard work, well, that just made everything just wow. And I could literally do this job for free because it is so rewarding when you get to experience that. So that's probably my biggest highlight.
It took me a while to think of answers for this one, actually, because there's quite a lot, and kind of in terms of narrowing it down. But like two things I think for me in particular. I think so. The first obvious thing is kind of building and sort of formalizing the informal knowledge that I've got, you know, from just working in the environment. So kind of, I know bits and pieces about labour. I'm reasonably confident with kind of, you know, immediate postpartum care, but there's a whole massive range of things that I don't know about. So it's kind of just building on what I already know and accepting that even though I've kind of got a little bit of a head start, like it's not enough just to sit on my laurels, and I do need to put an equal amount of effort in and just learn as much as I can. The other change I thought of actually is changing like my own mindset from being someone who helps to someone who does, if that makes sense. So yeah, the last 2 years, it's kind of been me asking the midwives, oh, how can I support this? What do you need? So on and so forth. But then flipping it around, so then like the onus is on me to do all of that, and there'll be someone asking me what they can do to support and what I need. That's kind of quite a big shift really in terms of thinking. So yeah, I think they're going to be my challenges at least.
So yes, there are lots of places you can look to find out more information, depending on the kind of thing that you want to read about. So a few good places to start would be the Nursing and Midwifery Council. So they're the main regulatory body for nurses and midwives. So if you look on their website, there's lots of information. We'll also put a slide up at the end that's got the links to these organisations, so you'll be able to see that information. The other place is the Royal College of Midwives, which is the main kind of trade organisation for midwifery. So they're a really good source of different information about becoming a midwife or an MCA. Health Education England is an organisation which is responsible for how education is delivered within health in general. So if you look on their website, information about maternity, and also NHS England and NHS Improvements, their websites have lots of information about current maternity policy. So if you're ever reading around midwifery or putting an application together for a course, then if you look at those websites, they will tell you all about what's called the Maternity Transformation Programme. So that's what's happening at the moment, and that's all about looking at how services are going to change over the coming years, are already changing and will continue changing. So they're really important places to look to understand the kind of context of where maternity policy is at the moment. In terms of other reading, there are some really inspirational writers who I would absolutely say to check out. So one is a woman called Sheila Kitzinger, and she was a birth activist and writer. She's written extensively about birth, and it has some fantastic books, so she's definitely worth checking out. Also Ina May Gaskin, who is an American midwife, and she has written a lot about like the essence of midwifery and natural childbirth, and again, fantastic work to look at. And then finally, there's a French obstetrician called Michelle Audon, and again, we'll put these on a slide at the end. Michelle Audon is really passionate about looking at how birth happens naturally as well, so has written lots of stuff about natural childbirth and how kind of birth happens in a really primal way. So they're definitely three people who are like seminal writers really to start with. So yeah, so that's a bit of a range of different sources that you can go to get a bit of a broad knowledge about the basics of midwifery and maternity policy. Thank you so much for joining us for this Midwifery Week. We hope that over the course of the week you've seen lots of different information and perhaps learned a little bit about midwifery that you didn't know before. You'll have heard from our clinical colleagues and also our midwifery colleagues in education about different ways into the profession, how to get on the courses, and hopefully you've had some really useful information that you can take away. Our aim from the week was really to try and inspire you and to help you learn about the diversity of this amazing profession and how many different opportunities there are within it that perhaps you didn't realise before were opportunities. So if you're thinking about applying to be a midwife, then good luck, and hopefully we will see you at some point in the future. And all that remains to say is that midwifery is the best job in the world, and you would never regret deciding to become a midwife. Thank you.